Winston Churchill, Empire, Brutality, and the Dark Legacy of a British Icon. Introduction: The Other Churchill. Winston Churchill is one of the most recognizable names in modern history. For many, he is the man who stood against Hitler, whose stirring speeches rallied the British people in their darkest hour. But history, if it is honest, must look at the full portrait, and Churchill's legacy is not one of simple heroism. Beneath the oratory and myth lies a darker truth. Churchill was a man of empire, driven by racist beliefs, who oversaw mass death, justified war crimes, and ruled with brutality. This is the story not of a savior, but of a ruthless imperialist whose actions caused immense suffering, from Bengal to Kenya, from the Middle East to Greece. Chapter 1. The making of an imperialist born in 1874 into an aristocratic family. Churchill's worldview was shaped early by privilege and empire. He served in British colonial wars in Sudan and South Africa, where he celebrated violence against savages and believed deeply in white racial superiority. Churchill once said, "I believe in the superiority of the Anglo-Saxon race." He also called for a scientific basis for hierarchy between races and believed in social Darwinism. These views weren't just private opinions. They guided his policies throughout his life. Chapter 2. A defender of empire at all costs. Throughout his political career, Churchill opposed any weakening of the British Empire. He was a staunch opponent of Indian self-rule, describing Gandhi as a half-naked fakir and calling Indian aspirations for freedom the beastliest kind of nationalism. In 1919, during unrest in India, Churchill defended General Dyer, who had ordered the massacre of hundreds of unarmed Indians in Amritsar. Churchill said the event was monstrous, but later voted against any punishment. In Kenya, Iraq, and Palestine, he supported collective punishment, bombing of civilian areas, and torture. His motto was clear: order through fear. Chapter 3. Chemical weapons and civilian targets. Churchill openly advocated for the use of chemical weapons against colonial populations. During the 1920s Iraqi rebellion, he proposed using poison gas against uncivilized tribes. "I am strongly in favor of using poisoned gas against uncivilized tribes. While gas may not have been deployed in large quantities, the intent was unmistakable." He saw no moral issue in using any tool to crush dissent among native populations. This wasn't limited to Iraq. In his role as colonial secretary, he supported the use of air power to bomb villages in Sudan and Afghanistan, believing terror from above was an effective way to maintain control. Chapter 4. The Bengal Famine. A preventable genocide in 1943, Churchill presided over one of the deadliest man-made disasters of the 20th century, the Bengal Famine. While Britain fought Hitler, India, its colony, was starving. Nearly 3 million people died from hunger. Churchill's policies were directly responsible. He diverted food from India to Europe and refused to release emergency grain stocks. He blocked offers of aid from Canada and Australia. His comments: "Indians breed like rabbits, and the famine is their own fault for being so careless." As people in Bengal starved, Churchill shipped Indian rice to feed European soldiers and stockpile food in the UK. There was no Nazi blockade, no natural disaster. This famine was created by cold imperial calculus. Chapter 5. Bombing of civilians from Germany to Greece. During World War II, Churchill approved indiscriminate bombing of civilian targets in Germany. The most infamous case, the firebombing of Dresden in 1945, where up to 25,000 civilians, mostly women and children, were burned alive in a city with no real military value. Was it revenge? Was it necessary? Historians still debate. But what is clear is that Churchill saw terror as a weapon of war. He applied the same logic in Greece after the war. When Greek partisans, who had resisted the Nazis, began organizing a new government, Churchill ordered British troops to fire on them, fearing a leftist uprising. The December 1944 events in Athens led to massacres and began a civil war. Again, order over democracy. Chapter 6. Mass repression in the colonies after War II. Britain's empire was crumbling. But Churchill's response was not to retreat gracefully. It was to double down on repression. In Kenya, Churchill supported the brutal suppression of the Mau Mau uprising. Tens of thousands of Kikuyu people were put in concentration camps, where they faced beatings, rape, starvation, and executions. In Malaya, British forces used napalm, mass internment, and crop destruction to suppress insurgents. Civilians were relocated into new villages, surrounded by barbed wire, often without basic needs. Churchill didn't just endorse these tactics. He personally approved them, believing they were essential to keeping the empire intact. Chapter 7. Indifference to human life. One of Churchill's defining traits was a cold utilitarianism, a belief that some lives mattered more than others, often based on race or loyalty to the crown. When thousands of Greeks, Indians, Kurds, or Kenyans died under British repression, he showed no remorse. He believed the empire was a force for good and that resistance deserved no mercy. He once said, "The Aryan stock is bound to triumph." This was not a man of moral complexity. It was a man driven by racial hierarchy, imperial ambition, and a readiness to sacrifice lives in the name of British supremacy. Chapter 8. The whitewashing of legacy today. Churchill is praised for defeating fascism. But the irony is bitter. The man who stood up to Hitler shared many of his prejudices: belief in racial superiority, conquest, and violent suppression. He is remembered as a hero because history has been written by the victors. Statues stand in his honor. His flaws are dismissed as context of the time. But for millions in the colonies, his rule meant suffering, starvation, and death. Conclusion. The dual truth of Churchill helped defeat Nazism. That is true. But Churchill also starved millions, suppressed democracy, celebrated violence, and perpetuated white supremacy under the banner of empire. To understand Churchill is to understand the dark side of liberal democracies, the blood-soaked foundations of their global power. He was not just a wartime prime minister. He was the last great emperor of a dying colonial system, and he clung to it with violence and pride. His legacy must not be erased, but it must be told honestly.